Hi, my name is Renata Bangs, and I am a Full Sail student receiving my master's in what am I saying? New media journalism. And I am here today with Dr. David Douglas. He is an educator and he is a professor at Central Washington University. He's also a founder of a nonprofit organization that supports individuals and families who are impacted by substance use. Welcome, David. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Today's focus is primarily going to be on mistrust that may be built from a childhood experience with any kind of agency, DCYF, CPS, law enforcement, and how that may impact an adult as they're seeking assistance for addiction, domestic violence, or any kind of.
I guess if I'm hearing you, you just want to know how someone can be negatively affected by being system involved, and how could a negative experience with some type of system affect someone who maybe later then needs help from one of those systems? And so my answer is going to come from my time as a counselor in the field and my wife and I were foster parents for a little while. So we went through all the state licensing and we were foster parents for about 6 months. And then, of course, my education and all that good stuff. And what I can say is kind of what you led with. I don't think any individual in any of these systems, most are intending to cause harm. But what happens if I just look at like the foster care system? There are so many people involved with one child's life that that child really has no time to develop a trusting relationship with people. And so I could see where that could cause harm when that person later wants to, seek help from a state entity, whether it's for drug and alcohol or mental health, they have a history of, and they might not even be able to clearly define why it is. Some can later in life. Like I was in the foster care system. You hear people say that in a negative way, and it's in my view because there's so many different people who interact with that child that they don't have an opportunity to build any relationship. And then the people within those systems change so frequently, the turnover and the different, they already are interacting with a lot of people. And then the people in the different areas change. So that creates a lot of mistrust in and of itself. So there is my answer to that question. The other thing I want to add, because this actually comes from my own personal experience as a child and then later as an adult with my own walk before I found a life in recovery. But I remember as a child, the only time that I interacted with state entities, whether it be law enforcement, medical, whatever it was in high stress emergent environments. I remember when my mom they used to call it a nervous breakdown, but she had a mental health episode. So that was the only time I saw those people is in those real emergent, scary kind of scenarios. I never really had an opportunity to learn about these entities outside of that context. And then later in my own life, right? I had my own situations in active addiction where it was only in these really heightened emergent states that I would interact. So again, you don't really have an opportunity to build a positive relationship. And I think in some ways that's normal because when do you call the police? When you really need them. When do you call for an ambulance? When you really need them. When do you get a hold of a state entity? When you really need them. So I think that plays into it too, to some extent.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I agree 100%.
I think you're going to see more of the mistrust due to the repeated behaviors. I
Mhm.
think if there was something really traumatic that happened one time, certainly that'd be a situation where you'd see that. But I think you're going to see more of the other side where someone just repeatedly is put through the system, and so they mistrust it because they have so many repeated negative experiences.
Based on your observations, Have you had any personal experience with somebody who has relayed that to you as a reason not to come in for help?
Oh,
Or
yeah, many times. That's actually the majority. A lot of people, specifically in the substance use disorder arena and even mental health, that there's so much stigma surrounding both of those areas because of societal views and systematic barriers that are in place that people completely avoid asking for help because even when they have in the past, they've ran into these barriers that they're just like, why should I? So
okay,
it's very common.
very common. Okay. Have you seen it where somebody has entered in the program and they've stayed for a while, but maybe, like you said, they come up against one of those brick walls or one of those barriers.
Well, it is just that. It's
It,
someone who's had repeated episodes of running into the same issues. And so they keep trying, but they run into the same brick walls or the same barriers. And then they just throw their hands up and say, why should I try? So they leave.
so,
Happens a lot.
so in those cases, when you come across that, and this isn't part of the questions, but it just made me think, when you're talking to somebody like, how do you try to break through to them? What are some of the things you say to give them confidence in the system again?
Well, during my time in the field, what I would do is number one, not be dismissive of their concerns and even own that the system is flawed and that it is fraught with issues. And I think by being authentic with people, I had a lot of success in keeping people engaged because I was able to develop trust that they felt heard, that they felt like I wasn't just another cog in the wheel of the broken system while I was in the system. I always tried to be open-minded and willing. And I think a skill that people need to have is being willing to listen and allow people to be heard.
And do you have to validate at times their experience,
Yeah.
that kind of experience talk?
Yeah.
Um, so when you were working with KXXRO, which is now Peer Rising, what was the initial resistance?
I can just tell you how it was designed that was completely different than most systems is that, and this is still the case today with Peers Rising, what was formerly KCRCO, is that when someone walks in the door, what they're expecting to encounter is having to fill out paperwork, having to answer questions, having to qualify themselves in some way before they can even talk to someone about what they may or may not need. It's the polar opposite in that when someone walks into Peers Rising, there's none of that. They walk in and staff say, "What can we do to help you?" And that relationship starts to develop. And then as they start needing certain pieces, but it's completely polar opposite of most entities. When you walk in the door, there's a gatekeeper, meaning a person sitting behind a desk and saying, well, you need to make an appointment, or you need to fill out paperwork, or you have to do all these different things before you can even ask a question on, trying to get to know what they need.
Do you think that approach could also help um, a child?
My wife owns a preschool, so, asking a 3 to 5 year old what they need, you're going to get a much different answer, maybe than a preteen who's been through some things. You might want to solicit some feedback from them to try to identify what they need. But I think it is a little different with kids. But then again, I think we also make a lot of assumptions. I think we make a lot of assumptions, and I say we, people who work within systems of care, whether it's treatment or mental health disorders or DCYF, I think that individuals working in those systems walk into a family situation, they make a lot of assumptions about what they're going to need before actually maybe doing a true assessment of some sort to find out what they need. So that's what my answer would be is for children, maybe before just jumping to what an individual or system or entity thinks they need, actually do an assessment and find out what the true needs are.
In your experience, what specific trauma-informed changes do you think treatment centers and mental health providers and these agencies, while doing their intakes, what specific changes do you think will help people who do have this fear or who do have, this
Yeah.
anxiety about reaching out?
Yeah, well, we've been talking about a few of them. One is I think anyone who works within a system of care needs to have basic ACEs training, and they can get that through what's called mental health first aid training. I think every provider should be required to have, at minimum, that basic level of care and ongoing training on how to truly assess what kids or adults need and keeping in mind that trauma-informed care, which is part of what that would be. So, ongoing training development for people and even as far as I would add not just for new providers but for people who stay within those systems requiring ongoing training so that they don't just get stuck in this narrow way of thinking. And then the other part of it is using evidence-based innovative systems of care and treatment to address people's needs because not everyone fits in this one silo of care, and we need to be open-minded. And I'm very passionate about this in the substance use disorder arena, is using innovative evidence-based treatment to help people find their own path to recovery. And we can expand this out to all systems of care. We got to
Right.
stop putting individuals and families in neat little boxes that we think they fit in.
Do you think that there is a crossover in communication that could happen between the people that are dealing with the children and the people who are dealing with the adults after the fact?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I think,
The,
people with lived experience
yeah.
as that's part of what Peers Rising is all about is having people with lived experience helping people who walk in the door who are seeking a life in recovery. I think that is really important piece that should be used in all areas of care, whether it's DCYF or abuse, domestic violence, having people with lived experience that have been able to navigate to a different way of living, better way, whatever words you want to use, but listening to them and using them to better the levels of care that are given.
If you had to advise any other entity on a structured change at the child's level. Now we're going back to the child's level. And if
Mhm.
you wanted to advise them, what would you tell them that would you think would make a significant difference in how they navigate being in that system? The children of it, whether it be 5 or 15 or
Sure. Well, I think you have to look at the family system as a whole and try to get some history of what that child's experienced prior to coming to you if you're just interacting with them. And it's a little bit of what I've said throughout this, ensuring people have the proper training. And I'm not a child life expert per se, but having the training needed to be able to identify issues that children are having or potentially could have. But it just goes back to that ensuring people have the right education and experience to be able to holistically care for a child. I think that's really important.